Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Matters Educational podcast. Clara Fiorentini joined me for a conversation about all things educational. Clara spoke about her own schooling, her teaching and lecturing experience, her blog, her new phonics programme, and a lot more. Hi Clara, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Darragh, how are you?
Good, and yourself?
Great, thanks.
So we'll start off with a bit about your teaching background. Tell me a bit about it. So why did you choose to become a teacher?
Why did I choose to become a teacher? Very good question. I come from a family of teacher and educators, so I was always very stubborn and adamant that I wasn't going to be a teacher. It's not for me. I'm not doing it. No. Even though I kind of always knew that that's what I was drawn to and it's what I wanted to do, even if I didn't want to admit to it. I was very passionate about English. I thought I wanted to be a journalist, but I knew I never really, was going to be brave enough to do something like that. I loved the writing element of it, but I definitely wasn't going to be pushy enough to, look for interviews and things like that. So I went to do teaching in PATS, and the appealing side of that for me was the fact that you could do an academic subject with it. So I got to do my English alongside the teaching, so that was grand. But the strange thing about it was I went to the biggest school, or secondary school in the country at the time, Carndon Community School. So there was, I think, about 1,500 pupils when I was in first year,
Wow.
Which was huge. And then I landed in PATS on my first day, and it was smaller, like in terms of numbers, and the campus itself was tiny. You could have dropped it into a corner of the secondary school. So that was strange because it's not really what you expect, college to be. It was quite surreal. But I enjoyed it. I got through the 3 years. Didn't particularly love all the elements of, lectures and things, but I lived for the teaching practice side of things. It wasn't always easy, but by the time I got to teaching practice, I knew I was doing what I wanted to do. And it was like, just get through this and get me to school.
So you mentioned teaching practice there. Have you any interesting stories or interesting anecdotes from teaching practice?
Teaching practice feels like 100 years ago now when you think back. Like it was, over 10 years since I had my last teaching practice. I just remember from my first placement when you were paired up with somebody, I really enjoyed that. It took, the scariness out of it. But I just remember, obviously I have an unusual second name, Fiorentini. There's not too many of them in the country, but we were all, standing around the corridor in, I think it was called the Quad area in PATS, and the schools were listed and, who the first years were paired up with. And I just heard this, I must be paired up with an Erasmus student. And somebody, was trying to pronounce my name incorrectly several times. And then I was like, no, that's me. I'm Clara. I'm from Donegal, actually. But no, and then it was grand, actually. We got on great, and teaching practice was fine. I didn't really have any scary experiences, thank God. I just remember for one inspection doing the Hacha Gaelic, because it was shacked in the Gaeilge.
Wow.
So I thought, yeah, we'll do the Hacha Gaelic. But the supervisor fell asleep, and at the end of, when we went for a little meeting afterwards, he was like,
feedback,
I saw on your plan you were going to do the Hacha Gaelic, and I didn't notice it. You didn't do it. I was really disappointed. And I was such, a timid person at that stage. I hadn't the heart to be like, well, you fell asleep. So I just took it on the chin and said nothing, which in hindsight was silly. And, you learn to speak up for yourself, I think, over time.
Absolutely, it is an acquired skill.
Yeah. I went to a little rural school in North Donegal, like it was next stop, Iceland, basically. But it was brilliant. It was such a wonderful community of people, and it definitely shaped, who I am as a person today. I loved primary school. But in that area back then, the dropout rate after first year in secondary school was extremely high. I think my sixth class was the first year that everybody from that school, finished first year. So that was a huge bonus. Literacy levels were low. So there was a big push on literacy in the primary school, and helping young people move on in the world and break out of the constraints, that may have held previous generations behind. I've lovely memories of poetry, novels and stories, creative writing competitions and things like that in primary school, plays and dramas, just lots of language. So I'd say that had a big part to play in my interest in literacy later in life.
You're also a part-time lecturer in education. Can you tell me a bit about that? Like, what subject area do you specialise in?
Well, I'm not actually part-time anymore. I have just accepted a full-time lecturing position, so I'm actually leaving school now this summer. Thank you. And I'm going to be lecturing in education, specialising in literacy. So, but for the past almost 3 years, I've been lecturing part-time on a few degrees now, but most of my coursework has revolved around early literacies. But I've also done a lot of work on play-based learning and senior literacy too. As I mentioned myself, in college, I didn't particularly enjoy the big lectures where we sat, watching somebody click through a PowerPoint and scrolling through, handouts.
Yeah.
Very few of us took anything in. I didn't enjoy it. So I think that influenced the way that I present my content and, create my lectures. And even my teaching, I think, was impacted by that. I love lecturing. I get such a buzz off it. But I do think it's partly because of the type of students that I work with. The college that I've been in, the students are really eager to learn. They're very involved, they have great ideas, they give their activities and learning experiences 100%, and it's so nice to work with students like that. Maybe it was different when I was in college, but people weren't as keen to get involved. They sat back a lot. But I try my best to balance it out with plenty of active learning and make things a little more workshop based, because if we're not inspiring the students to, by teaching them like that, how do we expect them to go out and inspire the kids then? Because they're going to stand up and use didactic styles of teaching then for the children, which is not what we want, obviously.
Absolutely. And tell me this about lecturing. How is the buzz of lecturing different to the buzz of the primary classroom?
Well, it's quite similar, but obviously you're dealing with adults, so the conversations are slightly different. You get a lot of feedback, you have great discussions, and the ideas that you're giving the students, a lot of them are taking them out and then putting them in practice. So you're still technically teaching, and it's still filtering down to the children at some level. And there's nothing nicer than when a student comes up to you and, and lets you know that, an idea that you suggested, they've tried it on placement and it works well, and, oh, my supervisor was happy with it, and, I'm really glad I tried it, and so on. So that's a rewarding side of it.
You manage a blog, littlemissteacher.com. What inspired you to start blogging, and what makes your blog stand out?
Well, as I mentioned, I love English. I love writing. Probably my biggest passion is writing, and ultimately I've always wanted to be an author, and I've done lots of little writing courses and things over the years. So after a few years teaching, I went back and did my masters in St. Pat's. I did the masters in children's literature, which was lovely, and I remember seeing it on the wall on a notice board when I was doing my B.Ed, and I thought, I'm going to go back and do that. And a lot of people said, oh, why are you doing that? That's not going to help you be a principal, or that's not going to, help you get up in the school. And it's not. I didn't do teaching to work my way up. I never wanted to be a principal. I wanted to study things that I was interested in, so going back to do 2 years on children's literature was just the dream. It was such a lovely course. We had Siobhan Parkinson. She was the children's laureate at the time, so she did a whole module with us on creative writing, which I loved. But then when the masters ended, there was a lull, and I'm one of those people who likes having something to do. I like being busy. If I'm not busy, I tend to get bored. And I'm a bit of a nerd. I like working. I like studying. And it was just towards the end of the masters, somebody had mentioned something about a blog or blogging, and I was like, what is that? So I looked into it, and that's how it began. And it was also a way of documenting my journey into the infant end of the school. I had been teaching for 5 years, I think, at the top end of the school. I had 4th class for 2, and I was going into my 3rd year in 6th class, and foolishly I was getting very comfortable there. I loved the senior end. I loved the creative writing, the projects, and just even the crack you have with the older kids. And then one May afternoon, my principal asked me would I go to juniors next year, and I nearly fell down. I wasn't up for it at all. I thought, oh my God, I had senior infants once on teaching practice. I know nothing about juniors. But I couldn't very well say no, me being me, so I went for it. And the blog then was my way of kind of documenting the different ideas and things that I tried out. And I started following a lot of the American teaching blogs. Like there's a huge blogosphere over there, particular Minds in Bloom by Rachel Lynette, Teaching with a Mountain View. It's a girl called Mary that runs that one. And then Hello Literacy by Jen Jones. And then the blog kind of evolved into something that was, documenting play-based learning and then literacy, and kind of just went from there.
Okay. And you mentioned that you had documented your experiences in the independent classroom. Did you document the things that didn't go well as well? Or just the things that you had success with?
Well, it's hard. I think in Ireland as well, we're very reluctant to talk about our feelings. Yeah. But I suppose I did document the things that went well and what I found well. But like in the past year, I've used Instagram a lot more. So, you can do your life stories and chat there. So I would talk about things that worked and things that didn't. But that's something that I feel like we probably should be talking more about, the things that don't work and ideas that didn't work well. But I have put up, pictures of things that were a disaster when it comes to play. Like there was one day we were doing the coffee shop, and I thought it'd be a great idea to let the kids play with tea and coffee at the water area.
Real tea and coffee?
Yeah, which was grand until somebody came to the door, and literally it was a 10-second interval, and I turned around and there was just coffee, tea everywhere, and it took about 2 weeks to get the smell of coffee out of the classroom. The kids loved it. It was just sensory heaven and all the rest, but the mess was not great.
But it was a learning experience.
Yeah, and I tell the students here in the college about it all the time. So after being at the senior end for 5 years, and feeling I had no real knowledge of how to teach junior infants, I automatically did 3 summer courses, spent my summer on Pinterest. My best friend Danielle had been teaching in a junior school for 4 years at that stage, so I literally had her plagued. I got her to bring me into her school, look at display boards. But to be honest, it was probably the best thing that I've ever been asked to do. I've never looked back, and if it wasn't for teaching down at the junior end, I probably wouldn't be where I am now.
You are a co-author on a new program called Like Phonics. Tell me a bit about that. What does the program offer, and is it evidence-based? And also, what would you say to teachers and schools who are considering switching to a new program for next year?
Okay, if you remember all that, that's a lot of questions.
So if you want me to repeat, I'll say a few.
Oh, you're great. Again. So Sounds Like Phonics is something that I'm really proud of. It's probably the proudest, I've been of my work so far. I'm very lucky to have just found myself within a really wonderful team of educators who all had the same, idea and vision for literacy in the junior end of the school. Phonics is something that's, a big topic in Ireland, and it kind of came out of nowhere, and people jumped on to a trend of, taking phonics kind of out of English and out of, reading and out of their literacy instruction. So, schools would have, their English, geography, whatever on the timetable, and then, comes 11 o'clock and it's like, oh, we're going to do phonics now. And I could never really get my head around that. And it was something, when I went to the junior end, I remember being handed a manual and being like, oh, this is for teaching phonics. And I'd be like, grand. But it's not, as if it wasn't part of your English. So I found I spent a lot of time designing my own resources and creating things to, yes, teach phonics and tick that box, but also make it contextualized for the children so that they were learning the alphabet and the alphabetic principle, but they were learning their sound, the name and the formation all together. So it wasn't this, alien concept whenever it came to putting it all together and learning to read. So Sounds Like Phonics is pretty unique in terms of that. It's not a workbook, it's a program. So the digital is the anchor of the program. We then have 4 activity books to support the learning that comes from the digital. We also have a teacher's manual that will guide you through each of those components. Now, although there's an activity book, it's still multi-sensory, and we really pushed at the publishers to ensure that our multi-sensory concepts were included. Otherwise, it was a no-go for us. So we have tactile letters, which are actually had to be printed in Spain. Because it couldn't be done over here apparently. So the children, are feeling their letters and so on. And there's a very natural progression into blending the sounds and reading words and then reading, short snippets of text and so on. Yeah, so basically, Sounds Like Phonics is a multi-sensory contextualized approach to letter knowledge. There's nothing like it on the market, and that's something we're very proud of. We all agreed that phonics is something that's become isolated in terms of literacy. It became a trend. It became its own thing on the timetable, which it never should have been. So for us, it was very important that we were getting phonics back into reading, and that it was being taught in a contextualized way. You asked if it's evidence-based, so it definitely is. It's a team of 3 very experienced educators and myself. bringing my own experience to it as well. Nothing here has been churned out. There's a tendency for programs and workbooks to be churned out very quickly in the country, without much thought behind them. But this has been up to 3 years of work now. One of the authors has just completed their PhD in phonemic awareness, and there's so much experience behind this, and there's not one element that we've put into it that can be questioned in terms of not being useful in terms of learning to read.
Everything's there for a reason.
For a reason. There's no busy work. Everything's purposeful. The glance, you might think there's colouring in it, but it's actually letter discrimination, visual discrimination work. It's all very carefully planned and there for a very specific reason. So you said then, what would you say to teachers in schools who are considering switching maybe to a new programme? Pick ours. Have to say that. But I think it's important that, the workbook culture, yes, is on the way out, but this, it's not a workbook, it's a programme, and it's very important to understand that. The books support and reinforce the learning of the digital. As I said, it's a multi-sensory approach, so it's important, with young learners to understand that the senses are the pathway to the brain. And this programme embeds letter knowledge in continuous text, and that's so important. And
it's Irish.
And it's Irish. It's all theme-based, so it's very easily incorporated in, to your Asher planning as well. And each exercise is aligned with the learning outcomes of the new primary language curriculum. So that's all there for your ease of planning as well, and also because it's very important, obviously, that it relates to the curriculum. And one of the nicest things about the programme as well is that, yes, you said it's Irish, but we have a lot of, digital work, and there's videos of an Irish child with the Irish accent saying, the letter sound, and it's a child's mouth as well. So, it's making it child-friendly as well, and, the children are going to relate to it that little bit more than seeing, an adult or just, a monster on the screen speaking. Do you know what I mean?
How do you think teachers can be better supported professionally?
Well, I suppose there are always areas for improvement, in all elements of, supporting teachers. I think the introduction of Droichead, it depends where you're from. There's a lot of positive to that, and in terms of, creating in-school supports for the NQTs. And I think NQTs are, one of the people who need to be supported the most, especially when they come out first, because it can be difficult. It's a big jump from college to school, yeah. Very much so. So I think greater liaison between schools and colleges is key as well, and that's something you hear a lot from students in NQTs online. A lot of them, go out and they feel very isolated and afraid to ask questions and so on. Mentoring NQTs is very important, but obviously I don't think just anybody can be a mentor, and I think just because you volunteer to be a mentor doesn't necessarily mean you should be one. Yeah. And that, the mentors aren't just let on with it. I think, that they should be followed up on as well. It can be a difficult time for, a teacher if they're paired up with somebody who they don't necessarily gel with or mightn't feel they can express their opinions. I think people need to learn to accept that it's okay to ask for help, and that it's not a sign of failing or shortcomings if you're asking for help. I think it's very important to create a school community of mentors, and you're not leaving it all to one person and not letting the NQT become the pariah of the situation as well. And people sometimes need to just take a step back and remember that we were all in that position once, and none of us, and nobody could say that they did. Nobody came to school, knowing everything. Yeah. And we all have to learn the ropes. And Something that comes up a lot as well from the students is, they go out to schools and they're often placed in classrooms where they're not necessarily wanted, or they arrive on placement and, the teacher's like, well, I didn't actually ask for a student, but I've got you. And like, teaching practice is hard enough without having to go through that.
True, it's not helpful when you know and you'll be told that you're not really welcome.
Yeah, and I know it's hard, like the colleges need classrooms for the teachers to go out to, but I do think that it's up to the schools to discuss it with the teachers a little bit as well, and see are the students going into an environment where they're going to A, learn from the teacher, and B, be welcomed.
So these days teachers receive a lot of information of varying quality that comes at them from every corner. How can teachers be better informed about what constitutes good research-informed educational practice, and how can they know the difference between someone's opinion online and someone who has gone to the trouble of doing the research?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's like just social media in general. We're, bombarded with stuff constantly, and it's becoming that way in the teaching world as well. And, just because something's there doesn't mean that it's fact. And at the end of the day, it's up to you to inform yourself. I think people have to remember that they're capable of being creative and coming up with their own ideas too. We are really lucky in Ireland that we have an extremely qualified teaching profession. The BEds and the PME, it's an extremely tough slog to get through, and it takes a certain calibre of person to come through those degrees. So then, there's no reason why those people can't, bring their own creativity to their job. I think, with online platforms and things as well, if you're unsure or, if you think something is questionable, then question it. Ask the person, how do you know this? What's your research behind this? What's your experience in this area? And if people are authentic, then they're not going to have any problem explaining it. I suppose that's the dangerous thing about, social media. You can have people preaching to you, but they mightn't have a notion about the topic in question at all, or experience in that area. Some of the advice you see dished out sometimes is crazy and completely unethical. It's a bit like Dr. Google. Some things need to be taken with a pinch of salt.
Absolutely.
I do think upskilling is key though, and that's only going to come from yourself. Education's constantly evolving. The people who think they know everything and have nothing to learn are the people who have the most to learn. We have great CPD in this country, but CPD, it does need to become something beyond the EPV days. We have a tendency to pick the handiest courses, to fast track to the course days, which is totally understandable. But this is why I think CPD needs to be more embedded during the school year. Not in a forceful, didactic way where you have to do it or else, but wouldn't it be nice if we had an area that we could upskill in every year? One of the nicest things about our school was our principal had a great attitude towards CPD. He would, let us go on whatever courses we wanted, but just on the condition that when we come back on completion of the course, that we presented our learnings or a little overview to the staff at a staff meeting or Croke Park hours, and it was excellent. At the start we were like, oh God, no, we're never doing anything ever again. But it was a really good way of recapping on the learning and bringing it back to the staff, and it kind of encouraged you to branch out and do things. So at the end of the day as well, you are ultimately responsible for the class in front of you, and you're responsible for your own knowledge and your own development. Education is not static, so we shouldn't be. No two classes are the same, and something that works well for one class may not work for another, and it's the same with any resource or idea. Only you can truly know your class, and only you are capable of choosing quality resources, quality content, and adapting your teaching styles to suit the children in front of you. And by undervaluing quality or just going with the flow, it's only the children in front of you that you're selling out at the end of the day.
Can I go back to social media just for a moment? Have you ever been on the receiving end of unfair criticism, and if so, how did you respond?
To be honest, I haven't had anything too much. I just remember way back at the start, I had a picture up of Seachtain na Gaeilge in our school, and there was a poster, over the infants' artwork or whatever it was. I can't even remember now. But I just remember it was Nina Moore, I think, and there was a fada missing, and somebody wrote some big spiel up underneath it on Facebook about how this is the ruination of the Irish language, and teachers like these shouldn't be posting online, and somebody else wrote this hurts my soul and all this. And I was just like, come on, like, you know, is Fargwell Bristian our cliche? But like, you know, that was a bit uncalled for, I thought, but like, you know, whatever, you know, people have little to be doing. But, you know, there are times where people should be called out, and, you know, there's a lot of resources going around, and, you know, people are buying them, but like, they're not grammatically correct. You know, there's a lot of bad stuff out there.
Yeah.
And
in English and in Irish.
Yeah, and I think if students or, you know, teachers in practice, you know, are buying things and they're faulty or not correct, then you need to go back about it. Like, it's like you wouldn't go into the shop and buy something that's broken, so you shouldn't be buying something online, you know, that's of a poor quality either.
What makes your blog stand out?
Oh God, cringe for my life. No, I don't know. I don't get too caught up in what's going on around me. Maybe it's age, but I'm not into, you know, the whole competing for like stuff. I don't think the teaching blog world is about that really anyway. I'm just, you know, paddling my own canoe, sharing good ideas and using my platform to help students and teachers as much as I can. I suppose I'm just trying to create what I wish I had myself as a go-to when I was a student. My blog is a hobby. I'm not really sales orientated or in it for, you know, getting free things sent out, which is glaringly obvious with some platforms. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for sharing resources, you know, but if they're of a good standard and error-free. As you mentioned already, you know, the amount of grammatically incorrect stuff out there is kind of scary. And it's really important, you know, something as little as considering the font you use when you're making resources is so important in terms of, you know, making your resources suitable to all learners. You know, you can't just use any type of font if you want, you know, children with dyslexia to be able to use the resources too. It's not hard to inform yourself, but really, like, you know, the blogosphere is a lovely place for educators, and fortunately, you know, it isn't as toxic as some of the other realms of social media, and there really are some brilliant Irish teacher blogs out there, and I just would worry that, you know, there are some that hone in on the naivety and inexperience of students in NQTs, but I do think it's something people are copping on to. I don't know, what you see is what you get with mine. I just like to think I'm promoting evidence-based good practice, bit of play-based learning, and being honest with readers and followers at all time. I keep things realistic. I give practical advice and practice what I preach.
I wonder if the initial teacher education centres should start dealing with this as part of their courses, the social media aspect of teaching and how to spot what's good, how to avoid what's not. What do you think about that?
I can see where you're coming from. I can understand that it would be very hard to rein it all in.
Yeah.
And obviously everybody's free to, you know, have their own platform and do whatever. But I think it's important that, you know, students are educated on what is good and what isn't, and then they can make up their minds for themselves. I think, you know, understanding things like font and you know, the types of resources that you should be using with children, and, you know, what's purposeful learning and what's, you know, busy work, is very important.
Should educational researchers have a background in teaching, and how much can we value educational research if the researchers have no first-hand experience within the classroom?
A lovely, difficult question, Darragh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, like, it would help if they had a background in teaching, but sometimes, you know, different people may need to research different aspects of schooling for various reasons. They need to be familiar with the classroom, but I don't necessarily think you need a background in teaching to qualify you to do research. I think once there's a close liaison with teachers and practitioners to keep things balanced, then I think that's okay. I do think if you're drawing up frameworks and curricula, then ideally some classroom experience would make sense, so things are grounded in the reality of teaching and, you know, not necessarily so idealistic.
What's your favourite book within the field of education, and tell me why?
Okay, I couldn't pick one. I had to pick two.
That's okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a very tricky one, and I could have listed about 40, but fortunately I've narrowed it down to two. The first one that I think everybody who's a teacher should buy is Developing Children's Critical Thinking Through Picture Books. That's Mary Roach's book. So it's a guide for primary and early years students and teachers on how to use, you know, picture books to develop critical thinking, and it's such a good book. It's a gem. I would advise everybody to have it, because I know a lot of my content is based around picture books and children's literature, and I still think people think those are just for the junior end of the school, but they're very much not. There's so much learning within them for all age groups.
Including 6th class?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. And then the other book, it's my Bible, but I can't believe, I've only come across it in the past few years since I started lecturing, and it's called the Teaching Reading Sourcebook, and it's by 3 authors, Honig, Diamond and Gutlon. It's a pricey book. You can definitely source older editions on Amazon, but I think it's a resource that all schools should have, and if you've a specific interest in literacy, then I really advise you try and get your hands on it, because it's got a description and a definition of everything literacy wise, but also there are some really, really brilliant resources in it, and photocopyable materials that you can use in the classroom yourself. It's brilliant. I would advise you to get onto your principal and get one for your school.
Can you see yourself writing a book about education for students and teachers?
Well, yeah, I would like to think so. I am embarking on a PhD now, so I think at the heart of my research, I hopefully will be developing something that teachers will be able to use in their own practice. Ireland is an amazing source, of educational research. There's so much here, but I feel that we tend to go overseas a lot, to look for the best advice when there's so much here, and it's such a pity. But also with research as well, I think the people who the research is written for aren't the people who are reading it. I know you're not going to just necessarily sit, go and pick out a PhD and sit down and read it. Yeah. But I do think something, yes, I'll just say yes, I'm going to design something, definitely going to write something that will be of use to teachers in the future.
Great.
Watch this space.
I look forward to purchasing your book. So in terms of teaching in general, I suppose I can say lecturing now, what is your priority for next year?
Well, focus on my new role. I did tell my school though that I'm not clocking out completely, I want to keep up links with the school, and I think that's the nice thing about lecturing in education as well, that you still have such, close links to the schools as well, and I do want to get out to my own school as much as I can. I had a wonderful 10 years there. It's a really unique school in terms of 79% of the students have actually English as an additional language. So literally every class you got was going to be so different to the class you had previously and the next ones that would come in. It's a convent school, and a lot of people thought, oh God, that's going to be very religious, and it must be very straight-laced over there. But we actually have, I don't even know offhand how many religions and different backgrounds we have in the school, but it was one of the most diverse places probably that you could walk into in Dublin, and with such an inclusive, welcoming environment, that I really will miss it. But yeah, focus on my new role. Hopefully it'll be as plain sailing as possible. I imagine it'll be a baptism of fire in the first year, but fortunately having a few years experience already, I should be able to maybe blend in and get on with it. But I'll definitely be keeping up the blog. Me, if I'm not busy, I'm bored.
Will your blog be more about lecturing now, or will it still be about teaching?
No, because I'm lecturing in education, I'm going to keep it teaching based. That's what my following has been built up on, and I'm not just going to jump topics now. Everything is pretty much literacy and play-based learning on my blog, so it'll still be that, and I'll still be sharing those kind of ideas.
What's the best thing about being a teacher?
No day is the same. It's the most rewarding career I think that you could have. Nothing is ever predictable. There's something to learn every day. There's a light bulb moment in every lesson. If you're not getting a buzz off it, then I don't think you should be doing it. You're in such a privileged position with a bunch of learners in front of you who, should be hanging on your every word. We're not there to keep them busy. We're there to inspire them and foster a true love of learning, and I think that's an amazing thing.
Well, thanks, Clara, for doing this podcast. I know that the listeners will learn a lot from what you have to say.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Darragh.
And that's where we'll leave it for now. Sincere thanks to Clara for agreeing to feature on this episode. You can find Clara's blog at www.littlemissteacher.com, where you'll find great ideas for your classroom. Please consider subscribing to the podcast through your preferred platform, and if you get a chance, please leave a review through the Apple Podcasts platform. You can see what I think about education by visiting my blog at www.matterseducational.ie. Feel free to follow Matters Educational on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. As always, if you'd like to feature on the podcast, drop me an email at matterseducationalireland@gmail.com or get in contact with me via social media. Thanks for listening.